And we're joined now by BBC producer Stuart Hughes. Good evening, Stuart.
Hi, Kerre.
She was absolutely on point, wasn't she?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to see the reaction to that rare address to the nation, the Commonwealth, by the Queen. The reaction on social media, if that's any judge, has been overwhelmingly positive. And it's very easy to be cynical and say, well, what does the Queen know, or what does the Queen care about my personal circumstances and the hardship that I'm going through? You know, there'll be people here in the UK and in New Zealand as well who are stuck in their flats with children screaming and wanting to go outside. But even commentators who wouldn't necessarily be natural supporters of the royal family seem to be generally in agreement tonight here in the UK that she got the tone absolutely right, because no other figure can embody Britain and the Commonwealth's national story in the way that the Queen does. As somebody was saying this morning in one of the Sunday newspapers, you know, this is the woman who Winston Churchill bowed his head before, and yet she's still there. So the address was aimed at reassuring the nation and the Commonwealth at this time of crisis, but also to draw on some of those past struggles. Of course, the struggle during wartime with a reference to the evacuees and to the Vera Lynn song, which of course the Queen herself lived through, but also to cast Britain's response to the coronavirus outbreak as another pivotal moment in our national story, but also to give a message of hope when hope is perhaps in short supply. I think what was noticeable is the tone. You mentioned the tone being spot on. It wasn't bombastic. It wasn't imperial in tone. It spoke of much quieter values: self-discipline, good-humoured resolve, fellow feeling, not sort of warrior spirit, but a much quieter sense of decency. And as you heard there, given a sense of history, the Queen saying that those that come after us will say the Britons of this generation were as strong as any, perhaps a sort of tacit reference there to the few and those who survived during the Second World War. I think it will have resonated with the British public, and the timing is significant because we're entering the third week of the lockdown here in the UK. The weather's getting better. We've seen on the news that people are tempted to go outside and sunbathe when they should be staying at home. The temptation to waver is always there, and yet this is the week that could be the toughest yet. The outbreak here in the UK is expected to continue towards its peak this week, and I think giving a sense of that bigger picture, that broad sweep of history and that collective effort that's necessary to beat this virus will have resonated here in the UK and beyond.
Well, you just know that she's not going to be a queue jumper. You know she's not going to take the mickey. She's going to follow the rules.
Yeah, exactly. You know, the message that the politicians have been saying throughout is stay at home, protect the NHS, save lives. And it's one thing hearing it from a politician or from the medical experts, and some people will be saying, well, we don't trust experts and I want to do my own thing. But when a woman who has sat on the throne for 68 years tells you something, then I think a lot of people will listen. And as I say, even people that tonight who aren't necessarily supporters of the royal family have said, yeah, she got it absolutely spot on.
And yeah, interesting news about Boris Johnson being admitted to hospital for tests. That's is that a precaution or in response to that high fever?
Quite a dramatic bit of political news came in about 2.5 hours ago, just after 9:10 in the evening here in London, confirming that Prime Minister Boris Johnson's been admitted to hospital for tests. He's had coronavirus, we know, for 10 days and has been self-isolating, but it appears so far he's been unable to shake off the virus completely, recover fully, and the symptoms are still persisting, particularly a high temperature. I'll read the short Downing Street statement that was issued a couple of hours ago in full. It says, on the advice of his doctor, the Prime Minister's tonight been admitted to hospital for tests. This is a precautionary step as the Prime Minister continues to have persistent symptoms of coronavirus. The Prime Minister thanks NHS staff for their incredible hard work and urges the public to continue to follow the advice to stay at home, protect the NHS and save lives. I understand the Prime Minister went to hospital about 8 p.m. this evening, so just about 4 hours ago, 3 hours ago. He didn't require an ambulance, I understand, and is expected to stay in hospital overnight. The Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, will chair the government's emergency committee that's coordinating the response, that meeting taking place at 9:15 tomorrow morning in the UK. It's quite clear from the appearances that Boris Johnson has made in recent days that he wasn't 100% well. He was last seen applauding key workers from the doorstep of his flat in Downing Street on Thursday night, and on Friday he posted a Twitter video saying he was still suffering from his high temperature. I've got to say that in both those appearances, Mr. Johnson looked far below his usual ebullient self. But tonight, Downing Street stressing the Prime Minister's admission to hospital wasn't an emergency. It was a precaution only, and it was taken at the advice of his doctors. And crucially, officials stressing tonight that Boris Johnson hasn't been incapacitated despite being hospitalised. They say he remains in charge of the government and is in contact with his ministerial colleagues and officials.
His fiancée, who's pregnant, also tested positive too, didn't she?
Yes, she did. That's Mr. Johnson's fiancée, Kerre. She's recovering from coronavirus. She's expecting the couple's first child in the coming months, and so there's obviously concern for the health of their unborn child as well. And Ms. Simmons announced on Saturday that she'd spent a week in bed with coronavirus symptoms, but said she was improving. She posted on Twitter and said, "I haven't needed to be tested, and after 7 days of rest, I feel stronger, and I'm on the mend." But I don't sense a mood of undue alarm at Westminster tonight, although there will, of course, be concern for Mr. Johnson's well-being, and good wishes have come in from across the political spectrum. Perhaps proof, as if we needed it, that COVID-19 doesn't discriminate. We're all vulnerable to it. And the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, went down with it. He seems to make a good recovery. And the government's Chief Scientific Advisor, Chris Whitty, also is self-isolating after experiencing symptoms. So, as I say, proof as if it were needed that message, which has become a mantra in the UK over recent weeks, stay home, protect the NHS, save lives, is more important than ever.
Yeah, especially when you saw the death of those nurses too. That's just, they are risking their lives to save people.
And what's been so noticeable is that I'm sure it's been the same in New Zealand as well, that there is a lot of trust, there is a lot of belief in what the government is saying and the importance of it. But it's when you hear it from people like the doctors, the nurses, the shop workers, those who are the front line, that we really appreciate more than ever now. I was in the supermarket doing some grocery shopping on Saturday, and I'm sure you're doing the same. You go into the supermarket and you look at the people who are on the checkout tills, who are stocking the shelves, and you feel more respect and more thanks to them forever, because it's not the hedge fund managers that we're thanking at this time of crisis. It's the people who are putting food on our tables and are keeping us fed and watered, not to mention the people keeping the water and the power and the internet and all those other essential services going as well at this time of crisis. That as difficult as things are, at least for many of us, we are able to get hold of the basics and the necessities and keep going through this time of unprecedented crisis.
Amen to that.